Welcome, my friends, to Paranormal Heart Podcast. Tonight's episode is pre-recorded, streaming on United Public Radio Network 107.7 New Orleans. I'm your host, Kat Ward. Thank you so much for tuning in. My special guests tonight are Justin and Erik of Paratruth Reborn. For those of you who've listened to the show before, you'll probably recognize Justin and Erik of Paratruth Radio. They took a little hiatus and have since rebranded. So tonight, we'll be discussing timeline shifts and the Mandella effect. So please help me welcome Justin and Erik with a K.
Thank you for adding that.
I hope they could see that in his description of his name.
For those of you who know Erik and Justin, when they had Paratruth Radio, they'd always introduce themselves as Erik. Justin would say, "I'm Justin," and I'm Erik with a K. So I had to throw that in there. So I am so excited that you guys have started your show again, because I've been a longtime fan of Paratruth Radio. Then we became friends, and then you decided to stop the show for a little bit. So when you guys told me that you were starting the show again, I was so excited.
It was, I think, a long time coming. We've tried to step away from the paranormal. I don't know how many times, Erik. Too many to count. Too many times. And somehow we're always drugged back into it. So it's something that we've always been passionate about. Even if we're not doing a show, we're passionate about the paranormal. It's just getting into doing it for as many years as we have, doing it every week. It started to get really repetitive. To us, it felt a little boring. So we've really pushed to change a little bit of how we are doing things.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
If you consider we've been doing this for 15 years and doing a show every week for those 15 years, it's like 720 episodes. So it does, weigh on you after a while, as you're like, how do we keep things spiced up for people?
Yeah,
and spiced up for you too, because you've covered pretty much every topic.
Yeah, exactly. And when we decided to take the year off, it was supposed to be indefinite. We didn't plan on taking just a year. We were going to just walk away completely. But as Justin said, things happen. The paranormal's always out there calling and whispering to us. And sure enough, here we are back again with new things to talk about that have since happened since we left. So we're excited.
The paranormal just grabs you back in.
Yeah,
it does. It's like those spooky shadow hands reaching out of the closet to yank you, It's...
Yeah. And I find too that even if you are going to be covering the same topics, you might have a fresh outlook, what you might have considered, what you firmly believed before. Maybe your outlook has changed and you have a different opinion now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of similar to when I first started the show. It's going to be 7 years already. But I know. I used to think paranormal was only ghosts. And then I realized, no, it's not just ghosts. Why did I all of a sudden go really white? Okay. It's ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, aliens, Mandella effect. It's so many topics in that genre that, is just amazing.
Yeah. You don't realize... Like, I think most of us kind of get stuck on or hung up on the aspect of ghosts first and foremost. For others, maybe it's cryptids, but it's like once you enter the paranormal realm, you realize the word paranormal is really just an umbrella of everything else that exists in the shadows. Yep. And once you start diving into it, it's spiral, you just get sucked in.
Yeah. Because I find a lot of times in the beginning, you have just the ghost people, just the cryptid people, just the UFO alien people. And all of a sudden, they start merging after a while because they realize it's all interconnected.
Yeah. And I think that's how it was when we first started podcasting ourselves. We started podcasting in 2008, I think. And back then, there was nothing online to go and learn how to podcast. We had to just wing it and meet a couple people here and there in person in order to learn things. And back then, everyone was very segregated because you had your Bigfoot podcast, you had your ghost podcasts. But now, you talk about the paranormal and we're talking about everything. It's just a tree with a bunch of branches, and it doesn't matter which way you go. Everyone is interested and they all tune in to listen.
And let's not forget conspiracy theories that
yeah.
falls under the paranormal umbrella, and to the chagrin of many paranormal enthusiasts. But Erik and I have talked to a couple of conspiracy theory people where we go away thinking, maybe it's true. Maybe their theory is true. But the biggest thing to realize too is conspiracy theory was a term coined by the government to discredit these theories, basically saying none of this is true. Not saying that they're wrong either. However, there was a discrediting factor in naming it conspiracy theory.
Yeah. The governments would have said, it's swamp gas, it's not aliens.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was really excited. Your second episode under Paratruth Reborn was time slips and Mandella effect. And if you recall, I had put in the comments for that episode that, as usual, my mind felt like it was going to implode with everything that you guys touched on. I was just like, wow, like this is crazy. And I just had to have you guys on and talk about the same thing. Like it was just really amazing.
Yeah, sure.
So who would like to start?
Oof.
Go
for
Both
it,
of us
Justin.
have so many things.
You start. Kick it off.
Well, time shift is one of those things that is talked about now more so than in the past. And it's so rampant on TikTok for those that are on TikTok, and spreading these different theories about time shifts. Some people are saying, the whole world is shifting. Some are saying, well, you just time shifted, not necessarily the whole world. And it's really hard to justify that scientifically because there's nothing that states in science that states that we're doing this. It's all theoretical. Even quantum physics right now is quasi-scientific theory. Mainstream science is still questioning quantum theory a lot of times. And so the time shift thing is one of those things that makes your brain think, because Erik and I talked a bit about this on the show. Kat, you and I have talked about this, where we feel something has happened, but what is it? What has changed? Why do we feel this way that we're feeling? Erik and I are both sensitives. You're sensitive. Maybe we're picking up on something else altogether. Maybe we didn't shift timelines or into an alternate reality. Maybe there's something else altogether. Mm-hmm. But what is it? Timeline shift is the only best logical explanation, or alternate realities. But even then, it's making a lot of people think that you're nuts, because they're like, "What are you talking about? We're still in the same." I've been that way for a very long time. But it's making people question you and your credibility because they don't know or understand what this is about.
Erik?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with Justin. And, I always take a skeptic approach to anything really, but especially with the whole time shift thing, because time shift is something you can't really prove it, because in order to know that something is changing in the future, you have to understand what that future is. So, for example, everything leading up to COVID was pre-COVID. Everything of COVID and after is post-COVID. And that COVID is considered a time shift. But we didn't know at the time it was going to be a time shift because we didn't know what the future held. And that's how things tend to happen, is like life seems normal. Then something big happens within the historical timeline, and we call it a time shift because it's the only way we can really explain it. Now, and we'll get more into it a little later, I think, but like when you consider the Mandella effect or little time slips, I think a lot of what we're seeing on social media, this kind of big blow up of the time shift, is a way to help explain people's misunderstanding or understanding of what is actually happening in our lives on a daily basis. It's hard to say that there's a time shift or a timetable change as an individual, because if we were to change timelines completely, then that means certain people that we know should also have either A, changed with us, or B, remained how they are, and therefore we would drift apart from them. But instead, our relationships tend to remain on track. So how can that be a time shift if not everything's shifting with it, right? And I think there's people who say, well, you can time shift just as an individual, you can grow. And again, that's something that, as we'd said on our podcast last week, that can be done easily just by simply going out and getting a new job, or getting married, or getting a new car. You're changing your future based on your choices now. And that will shift the quote unquote timeline to something than what was predestined originally before, say, getting married.
Well, I will counter that with this. The only way to really see something in a timeline shift as far as relationships is concerned is if a relationship takes a complete 180, and the day before you had this great relationship, and then the next day all of a sudden that person isn't talking to you anymore for no in particular reason other than they don't want to talk to you anymore. Yes, their opinions can change. However, if the relationship is 100% on track, and then all of a sudden the next day, like, what changed in that person's mind all of a sudden?
I also mentioned too that when I made that comment on that episode, that I find so many people are throwing away these terms willy-nilly now, and I think a lot of times it could just be they're not remembering properly, just poor memory. But I do firmly believe that the Mandella effect and all that happens because, just for an example, a couple of years ago, I remember my husband saying, I can't remember, there was a specific kind of pie that he liked, and he always liked it. And now he says, no, he's never liked it. And my daughter and I looked at each other. It's like, no, you've eaten it. You've always loved it. He goes, no, I've always hated it. And we're like, no. And it's just things like that. It's just like, what are you talking about? Like, are you tripping, honey? Like what's going on? But he's like, no, I never liked it. So it's funny how you could have somebody even in your family where you have like some remember something one way, and then somebody else is like, no, it's not even like that.
Right. And I think it's important to consider that. It's one thing if you yourself remember a certain event a certain way, but nobody else does. Then it's like, okay, did I misinterpret it? Did I misremember it? Whatever. But when you have multiple people believing the same thing, but then others around you don't believe that same thing, well, now it's like, well, wait a minute, something changed. A prime example for me, the last movie that I was working on, we were at a racetrack in Western Ohio, Northwestern Ohio, and the first day, no one talked about it. We were just like working and whatever. But there was this sign, and on this sign, it was a memorial sign, someone who passed away. It was a man wearing a ball cap, and he was looking off to his right. No big deal, just something I saw him passing a few times. The next day, me and a group of my coworkers were sitting on the benches overlooking the racetrack on break, and I noticed the sign again. Only this time, it was a woman with curly hair looking the opposite direction. And I was like, yesterday that was a man with a ball cap. And two guys with me said, no, that was a woman with curly hair. That woman. I said, no, I'm pretty sure it's a ball cap. And they tried to argue with me. And then one of my other friends who were standing with us, like, he walked up, he said, what's you guys talking about? Told him, he's like, looked at it. He's like, dude, that was definitely a guy with a ball cap yesterday. So it was 2 versus 2. 2 of us saw a ball cap guy, and the other 2 only saw this woman with curly hairs. And what happened? Who's right? Who's wrong? So it's one of those events where it's like, what is that a Mandela effect? What changed? Did a timeline change? Did it shift? And something got messed up? We don't know, but it's definitely a curious thing.
And I've been half joking around with you guys the past few years that I say that what my memories are from Earth Prime. I'm not on Earth Prime anymore. I just kind of, and I say that to people around me too. It's like, oh, sorry, that must have been my Earth Prime memories, not my Earth Now memories. And some of them laugh and some of them look at me like, what?
I still look at you like that no matter what you say.
Oh,
So.
you always will. I'm so sorry for the people watching this. I can't seem to get the light. Okay. I think it's a glare off my screen, but I don't know. I do apologize if I seem too washed out.
Cat's really just a ghost. You guys didn't know that.
Yeah.
The Mandela effect is probably something that goes back way further than what they're calling timeline shifts now.
Mhm.
The Mandela effect could be a side effect of a timeline shift, but again, try and prove that, of course. And if nobody is aware of what the Mandela effect is, it originated from when Nelson Mandela was in prison. There were people that remembered him dying in prison, and then all of a sudden he wasn't dead. He was freed from prison, and I believe became president of South Africa or one of the countries in Africa. And that's where this kind of all originated from. This had happened well before that, but that was one that really affected everybody because TV was a huge factor at that time and all of that. So there's been so many different ones that have come up, and we brought it up on our episode for the timeline shifts and the Mandela effects, of more recent ones that have kind of come to light.
I definitely remember when he was released, and I looked to my family and I said, released? Did he not die in jail like many years ago? And some people said, yeah, I thought so too. And then other people were like, no, he never did. I'm just like, wait a minute. How do you guys remember that?
I remember we were talking about it. I think it's probably 2012, 2013. I think we had first talked about the Mandela effect, and we both remember him dying in prison. So that's why it was a big deal for us. We did a show all on the Mandela effect because it was hot news at the time. Today it's just a word that's thrown around a lot because there's a lot of things changing apparently. But it was definitely a huge surprise, and it was very it was riveting for us, and it was something we needed to talk about at the time. And who would have thought that such an event would trigger so many other events like it in the future, So, and we're talking, 12 or 10, 11, 12 years later. And here it is still just growing every day.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because it seems to be a global topic now with the internet and how people can just talk right away around the world. So it seems to be a global topic too now.
Well, the one that Erik and I had recently talked about before we recorded the show was Richard Simmons passing away. I remember him passing away years ago. And then to come to find out that he just passed away this year, I was like, what? And I've said that about a couple of different people. Like, I thought he was dead. Some of them I didn't know, of course, but some of them were like, no, I remember him dying a few years ago. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, is it just memory loss or something, or is there really something going on? I do believe that, like I said earlier, that some people, maybe it's the memory thing, but I do believe that something strange is going on.
I'll throw this out there real quick, only because I've heard of this theory too, is that there's false memories being, I don't know how you would word it, not necessarily implanted, but we have false memories, and the reality is kind of completely different. And it could be a mass hysteria thing. It could be all the things we've talked about right here. Who knows?
Erik, what do you think about that?
I mean, it's hard to say. I feel like a lot of these Mandela effects could be events in which, mind you, we're all very busy people. Like, people around the world are busy, constantly looking at their phones, constantly working, constantly talking. So to see something in passing, like maybe, since we're talking about Mandela specifically, we see somebody died who looked like Mandela, and maybe the word or the name sounded like Mandela, but it wasn't, but we thought it was. And so later on, when he actually gets released from prison, we're like, well, wait a minute. And therefore, it's just misinformation or misremembering, I should say.
Mhm.
We heard something wrong. We allowed our minds to fill in the gap. And then later on, we're proven otherwise. And we're confused because we're like, well, wait a second, something changed, when in reality it didn't. But again, that's just assumption. We're not talking about millions of people here who tend to witness Mandela effects. We're talking about high thousands of people. The majority of people, when they say like, Mandela was released from prison, the majority of the world knew that. They knew he never died, but the small group believed otherwise. So it's hard to say. It's weird that there's thousands of people who would believe that. Was there a shift where a certain group of people shifted into a different timeline or a different Earth, a parallel universe, whatever? Or is it some sort of like mass hysteria that just happened by accident to reach a number of different people? Because really, people think us the same. There's one thing that I've been taught over and over and over again is that no one has no one has an original thought or an original idea. There's nothing that you can do or say that is new.
Mhm.
The only difference is whether or not you proceed with that thing before somebody else does. Because we all have had ideas only to find out a week later, a year later, 2 years later that someone else did it. And you're like, dang it, why didn't I do that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's because we all have a very similar, connections to each other, to the world, to the universe. And so our thought patterns are more or less alike. So it's very possible that just happens that thousands of people thought one thing while everybody else thought another.
What was it, Justin, that you came up with that somebody else did too? I'm curious.
So, have you ever heard of the Puppet Time Murders?
No.
It's a movie.
Maybe I did.
Yeah, it's a movie that came out, and I was naming my story Murder in Puppet Town. And I was starting to work on it, and then literally like a week later, this movie released. I hadn't seen trailers on it because at this point, I don't even have cable TV. I'm only using streaming services.
Same.
And I'm like, son of a gun. Somebody's already gotten to it.
Yeah.
And I can still write this story and make it my own. However, I saw it. I'm like, I can't release it now because it was gonna be a full length book. So I'm like, maybe I should just leave it alone. I think I deleted it actually because I'm like, there's no point. Like, it's already been done. Literally almost exactly the same, because it was human detectives paired with puppet detectives, and people or puppets were getting murdered. And to Erik's point, apparently I was remembering Richard Simons, not Richard Simmons, passed away, and I heard Richard Simmons, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Reasonable explanations.
Yes.
Always got to debunk. I agree 100%.
But Nelson Mandella, I definitely remember him just passing away in jail.
Yes.
So yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't think it falls under the category of Mandela effect, but I remember years ago when I was a teenager, I used to get these science magazines. So if it was 1980, yes, I'm dating myself, it was Science 80. If it was 1981, it would be Science 81, and so on and so forth. And in the beginning of the magazine, you'd have like little mini articles. And one of them was a cave in South America. There was a man and a woman, and during when they did the carbon dating, they were human like we are now, and they did the carbon dating and they lived during the dinosaur era. We've been taught in school that was not, like, we did not live in the same timeline as the dinosaurs. And then it said in the article, to be continued, they were going to be doing more about it. Every issue, I kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and they never talked about it. And I've been, even today, 2024, I still Google it to see what happened, if there was anything. I can't find anything. It was just so fascinating. It's just been it's been eating away at my sanity. So if anyone's watching or listening this episode and you remember that, please reach out to me to help me realize that I'm not as crazy as I'm starting to feel.
Well, I'll tell you, like, I mean, maybe in the 1980s, that would have been huge news,
Yeah.
But today we have creationists, creation scientists, who have found studies and done carbon dating to see that there were humans that indeed lived with dinosaurs. And in fact, there have been a number of stone etchings in caves from thousands of years ago that show people riding dinosaur-looking things like triceratops or something with a long neck. And of course, there have been various fossils found as well, such as human footprints alongside giant dinosaur footprints, something that would look like a stegosaurus. So the fact that there is, I think that's one of the cool things about living in today's time, is we have the scientific tools to kind of dig deeper into these things that back in the 90s, when I was growing up, we would not have been able to understand or known. Like carbon dating is been hugely successful in helping to prove timelines of our human history. And I think that's something that's just really cool, like so many. I think it's interesting that as time goes on, every year something new is investigated that we have constantly been bombarded with in schools, told one thing, meant to believe one thing, whatever, only to be disproven later on. Say, oh, hey, remember all that stuff you learned about dinosaurs being millions and millions and millions years old? Turns out they're only thousands of years old, and they lived right here with us and died at some point. Whether it was a global catastrophe like an asteroid hitting or the ice age or whatever, somehow they died, and yet humans continued to live. And of course, there's this whole idea of evolution and microevolution, which is something I absolutely love to talk about. Justin and I did a show on microevolution a long time ago. It's called Evolution 2.0. It was based on a book. And it's this idea that evolution itself doesn't exist. Like mass evolution doesn't exist. So in other words, you, Justin, me, we didn't come from some sea creature that happened to learn to breathe on land and then sprout legs and walk away. Instead, there was microevolution in which there was a certain creature known as a humanoid. We'll just say humanoid in this case. There were certain fish, there were certain land animals, and we adapted, microevolved over time due to our surroundings. And there's actually an episode of Expedition Unknown in which Josh Gates delves into this idea of humanity and their existence, and how there were something like 10 or 12 different subspecies of human, leading right up through the Neanderthals and into what we are today. And he showed various scientific evidence and archaeological evidence that proved that these various subspecies of humanity split off in different directions as climate changed. And it was Homo sapiens who ended up surviving greater and longer than the Neanderthals. And so Neanderthals weren't really us. They were just another version of us that died off, while Homo sapiens were able to leave the oceans, go inland, find food and vegetation, and survive. While Neanderthals, who lived on the coast, lost out during the cold weather. They didn't have fish, they didn't have proper nutrition, and they died off. So things like that, I think, is really cool to think about. Like, oh, there's all these animals that supposedly didn't live with us, and yet every year there's new scientific evidence saying otherwise. And it kind of rewrites history for us.
Well, not only that, carbon dating in 1980 compared to today, maybe they were told, back off on this because the years are a little bit off. I'm not saying I don't believe that humans didn't live with dinosaurs. I truly believe we coexisted at one point. But maybe that was the reason why you never saw another copy come out or a continuance of the story.
Maybe.
I'm going to have to look into it though. Now that you mentioned it, I'm going to be looking into it.
We've piqued your curiosity. Yeah. That might be another episode for you guys.
But like you said though, Kat, you don't know if it's a Mandella effect or not.
Yeah.
And most of these we don't know 100% or not. It's just we have this group of people that's saying they remember certain things a certain way, and now they're different. But just like we were talking about the timeline shifts, how do you prove that? You can't.
And was it a Mandela effect, or was it a conspiracy theory where they don't want us to know and they just put a kibosh on the story?
Could be too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just found it interesting, and it still drives me nuts. So have you heard of any new Mandela effects the past couple of years?
Well, we brought him up on the episode. I had looked up, there's this guy on YouTube that does Mandela effects, and he releases videos regularly. The one that kind of I was fascinated with, and it's not necessarily a Mandela effect because maybe I just had never heard this history. But did you know that there were camels in the Midwest in the time of the cowboys?
Yeah, I remember that on your episode. I did not know that.
Apparently, the army brought in camels to be basically horses in desert climates in the U.S. And apparently, several of them had escaped, become feral. There's a legend of this one particular camel that was almost zombie-like because it had become so feral it was also almost monstrous. That one was a really fascinating one. Eric, what out of all those ones that we talked about on that episode, was there any that you really were like,
I mean, all of them, because none of them made sense in my book. but there are some other ones that I actually have looked up, and I just brought them up on my phone here to share with you guys. Like peanut butter. You guys know Jiffy peanut butter. Do you remember it as Jif or as Jiffy back in the 90s and 80s?
I think I remember it as Jiffy. And
Okay.
it used to have the peanut right on top of the peanut butter. When you opened up the jar, they had an actual peanut on top.
Mm-hmm.
I know this one because I've seen it several times. I remember it as Jiffy.
Okay. But Jiffy never existed. It's only ever been Jif, J-I-F. And people think that the reason we got Jiffy is because the biggest competitor at the time was Skippy peanut butter. And they combined Jiffy and Skippy to create Jiffy. Is that true? Maybe. I mean, that's the way they're trying to describe it nowadays.
Right.
But I do recall it being Jiffy when I was a kid. Completely random, but on record is I used to love Peter Pan peanut butter. Just the name of it alone made me happy.
Right.
Yeah, it's fun to say, Peter Pan.
And I always loved the crunchy over the smooth too, and specifically Peter Pan peanut butter.
Looney Tunes. Do you remember as tunes being spelled Toons or Tunes?
Oons.
Yeah.
Apparently, even though it makes sense, Looney Tunes has always been spelled Tunes.
Which doesn't make sense in my opinion.
I remember
music in it, anyways.
Yeah. I remember I used to have an album, Looney Tunes, and I used to listen to it. I'll have to ask my dad if he still has it and take a picture and send it to me.
One more for you guys. Curious George, tail or no tail?
I remember him always having a tail.
Always having a tail.
I don't know, but I want to say he had a tail.
Yeah, no, he never had a tail. Never, ever. He has never been drawn with a tail. But I definitely recall a monkey having a tail.
Well, yeah, he's a monkey. Monkeys have tails.
I recall him swinging from things with his tail, like hanging upside down and stuff.
Technically, he's a chimp.
Justin, we don't need your
semantics, Justin. Semantics. My Lord. Yeah, my kids used to watch that when they were younger. I'll have to ask them, do you remember Curious George with a tail or without?
Interesting things. These are things that keep me up at night, by the way.
They don't keep me up at night, but when I'm awake, I'm like, God dang it.
Yeah, that's what gets me close to like getting car accidents and things like that. So in my mind that I'm like,
that's usually when I'll look at it or think about it too. It's just randomly in the middle of my day. I could be at work and then I'm like, well, now I have to look this up. What is going on?
That's one of the weird things about like if you drive on a regular basis, and most of us do, and I forget the name of it, but there's this condition in which we become so accustomed to driving that we don't have to think about it. We don't think about using turn signals. We don't think about the cars next to us. We don't think about looking behind us. We can have full-on conversations, be off in a completely different world in our heads, make it from point A to point B, and then get there and be like, wait, what happened in between that time? Because I never remember. I'm always in my head about stuff, and yet we got there safely, which is just crazy.
I still think that we've gone through wormholes, Eric. We've had this discussion when I was living in Ohio and going to the gym all the time together.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Huh. So when we, Justin and I, when we used to work out together at a local gym, about 10 minutes from my house now, we would drive to the gym. It would take probably about 10 minutes to get there, and it would feel like a good 10 to 15 minutes. But every time we drove back, it would happen so quick. And just like 7 or 8 minutes, we'd be like, why is it always faster to drive back? Taking the same route, by the way.
Right.
It's not like we're going a different route. It's point A to B and B to A, same roads, same conditions, but it's always faster coming back. And you can time it, and it seems like it's still faster. And it makes no sense unless there was indeed a wormhole on that side of the road every time.
So in my area, we have a hospital 20 minutes one way and another one 20 minutes the other way. So 3 different towns, mine included. And one of them, when you go to the hospital, it takes forever. It just feels like it's taking forever. But when you come home, it's just like we're there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's fascinating how we can do that.
I've done it so many times I can't even remember now, especially here in North Dakota. And I was driving back and forth to a small town because I was postmaster out there. There'd be multiple times that I'm like, I'd have to drag myself back. Like, stop doing that. You're going to get into an accident. And there's been multiple cases where that never happens because people are on autopilot. And it's like, how did you not remember the entire trip? Yeah. How did you not crash and not remember the entire trip?
Well, I think that's one of the things that's really cool, just from the human perspective, is like, you ever, you're holding something and you drop it, or something rolls off the table and you're able to quickly catch it, and you're like, how did I get there so fast, or catch that before it fell, or how did I brake so quick when I wasn't even paying attention? And it's like, it's hard to understand or realize that when we're checked out mentally, our awareness, our body, everything else is still functioning on its own in its normal habitat. And so it's weird, but when you're not thinking about reacting, your body automatically does it. And so your reflexes are much faster because of instinct that kicks in rather than our own primal idea to think. And that's what I think is really cool. When we can sit here and think about things, and we will fail over and over and over again. But as soon as you forget and just drop thinking and let instinct kick in, well, boom, you're catching things, you're moving fast, you're being aware of things that you don't even know you're aware of half the time. It's pretty cool.
So is that really what's going on when we have these time slips or Mandella effects? Are we just mentally checked out? And,
I mean, from someone who's, checked out pretty much 95% of the time here on my end, it's very possible. That 5% that I recall is like, but it's, it's a hard call. Like, again, it's all theoretical. I think the one thing that I think is happening on social media is that they're using the term time slip or time shift as a way to generate views and get more reactions to blow up their, in this case, TikTok. That's where it's most commonly found. TikTok. And so anything that happens, any little thing, like, hey, time shift, hey, time slip, oh, hey, Mandella effect, and they got click after click after click, and there's a lot of people very susceptible to those things, and they will react. And I think that's one thing that is very common, though, is a lot of people will react to things and believe things without considering the truth behind them or logically thinking about the things that are happening. I can't tell you how many times I get photos that show up on Facebook of people catching supposed ghosts on camera. It's like hundreds of people saying, yes, that's a ghost. It's a ghost. It's so scary. And I like look at it. I consider it. I even put it into my computer just to make sure. And I'm like, that's just a tree, guys. That is a tree in the
He
middle
also
of the
sends them to
cemetery.
Justin a lot of times.
I always, and I won't even tell him. I'll just like, hey, what do you see here? Just to test him.
Yeah.
But it just amazes me, like how people are so quick to react to things they want to believe in without taking the time to actually truly justify whether or not they should believe in it. And I think that's kind of might be what's happening here with the whole time shift thing. It's people are missing time frames from their life because maybe they're checking out, like you said, Kat. We're so self-absorbed, and quite frankly, we are all very selfish. It's just the truth. As we become self-absorbed and we miss out on little things, or we hear things differently than what is being said, we misjudge things, we misunderstand things, and we start to create our own stories in our minds subconsciously, so that when something disrupts our normal thought patterns, our normal stories, or wants to conflict with our own opinions, well, now we're like, well, wait a minute, I remember it this way.
Mhm.
But it's like, do you though? Or did you just not listen or not hear it or not see it the way you thought you did? You know,
But then you have those people who say that they've been abducted and they have missing time.
I have been abducted. I am a strong believer that abductions happen. Okay.
Oh, I do too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Eric, it was just your memory was wrong. Your memory.
Maybe.
Was it a little too much rum, Eric? Was it like what?
No,
This was when he was a kid.
I was little. I was a kid.
Oh,
I was a kid. Yeah, that's
so
why
if
I'm
he
a
was
believer.
drinking rum, his parents have to be questioned.
Yes, that's why I'm a believer. So this is something that's very vivid to this day. And there have been a lot of scary things that happen as a kid that are vivid, but this one is really scary. And there's not much to it whatsoever. I was just sleeping. No dreams, I don't think. All I recall is a bright white flash of light. And I woke up screaming bloody murder, calling for my parents, crying. My dad had to come in, comfort me, and then he had to lay down with me to help me fall back to sleep. But since that moment, I woke up, and here I am at 38 years old. So we're talking, I don't know, 30 years probably later. I'm like, I think there was an abduction that happened, because I don't know what happened. Like, I have no idea. All I remember is the flash, and somehow I associated it to either a bright light, maybe inside something, or a bright light flashing away from me after it like dropped me off back in the house.
And there were no thunderstorms or anything that
No
you recall.
thunderstorms, no, nothing that I recall. In fact, I remember even having the window open, because it happened in the house that I currently live in. My house has been owned by my family for 60 years. So,
oh wow.
A lot has happened in this house. And the room that I was in when I was a kid is one of my downstairs bedrooms. And there's a window that my bed was up against. And I remember I could always lay there and look out my window. And that night, if I'm not mistaken, the shades were open and the window was actually up. I think it was springtime, like late spring. So if it were raining, I would have had that down, because rain tends to come in through those windows a lot. So yeah, it was a clear night. There were stars. But for whatever reason, somehow, sometime while I was sleeping, there was this white flash of light, and it scared the bejesus out of me. Like, I was terrified. And to this day, yeah, I still stand by it. Like, nothing has been able to convince me otherwise.
Has anything like that happened again in your life?
No, nothing. I mean, nothing like that. Obviously, a lot has happened in my life, the whole paranormal spectrum stuff, but no, nothing like that. Like, that was such I've been through a lot of scary things, we'll say spiritually, but never have I woke up screaming like that. I've woken up in the middle of like praying and trying to banish a demon that was haunting me in my sleep, and that happened back in 2008. I went through a 3-month period of demonic oppression, where not only was I having nightmares and night terrors, but I was also seeing black masses and shadows in my room. They were touching me. They're laying on my bed. There was a disembodied growl on the side of my bed, as along with like what would sound like paw prints, like a dog's nails clicking the floor as it walks, but nothing there. There's a lot of things happening, and there was one night where I had this night terror. It was a combination. You know how dreams are; they kind of get weird. They're mixed with various elements. But I was over by my parents' house, and I walked to their backyard, and I showed up, like I appeared in my front yard of this house, which I did not live in at the time. In fact, my cousin, Justin's brother, had this house. He was living in it, renting it out from my parents. And I remember in my dream, when I got there, there were a bunch of police cars, ambulance, fire trucks, lights on, no sirens. Everybody was gone. Doors were left open. There was equipment on the ground. Next thing I know, I'm inside a house. Not this house, not my parents' house, just a house. I heard noises coming from upstairs, and then 2 cops showed up next to me. They both had their guns drawn. The one said, "I'll go up there," and they kind of held me back. The one went up the stairs. I remember him walking up to the right of the staircase, then across the little like overhang where it would cross into a room. Complete silence, and then gunshot. The other cop went up there, a second gunshot. I don't know what happened, but in my dream, I knew that they killed themselves. I started freaking out, and I turned around. And when I turned around, they're on the wall next to me, like right in front of me, looking at me, probably standing about 8 feet tall, was what I believed was the devil's shadow. And it was, long chin, long pointed nose, huge horns. And I was so terrified that I started saying scripture in my sleep. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He is my strong tower. And as I'm saying that, I awoke from the nightmare, mid-speech, sat up on my bed, still going through the motions, saying those same prayers, in reality, awake. And it took me a good 30 seconds before I was like, wait a minute, I'm in my bed, I'm not in a dream. And that was like one of the most terrifying events I've ever had in that particular situation that I was going through.
Your heart must have been racing too when you woke up.
Yeah. It was so weird because it's like I didn't just wake up, think a moment, and then kept saying those prayers. They happened as I was sleeping. It's like, oh, I rose up and awoke from my sleep to waking moment, still amid verbiage of whatever the prayers were. And it took a little while for me to realize what was happening and that it was really just a dream. Not to say that certain entities can't dig into your dreams, but you never know.
Do you feel like it was just a really like a nightmare, or you were actually being attacked in your sleep?
I think I was actually being attacked. I mean, like at this time of my life, like when I talk about demonic oppression and affliction, like there were things happening no one else could see or understand in my household. And like at that time, it was me living there, my 2 sisters, and my parents. So everyone was aware of each other, but no one saw these things that I was seeing. And at the time, I wasn't drinking. I never did any sort of drugs. I was completely sober, focused on my fitness, my health. So the fact that this kept happening was kind of scary. But I do know what the trigger was, I think, what opened the door. Because it happened when I received a book called The Lesser Keep Solomon, and I read through the entire book. And unknowingly and unwittingly, I opened a door that started with just visions. Like I would fall asleep and I would have a flash of a vision. And the very first vision I ever had was a man's face. It was elongated. His mouth was agape open. His eyes were hollow white sockets. He had tentacles coming out of his face and long white stringy hair. From that day forward, or night forward, for 3 months, nearly every single night, there was a vision, a nightmare, and eventually night terrors. And in the middle, something started showing up in my room. It would hover over me, wide awake, not while I was sleeping. I'd look at it at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. It would be standing there. It would sit on my bed. It would touch my hair. Like I said, there was like a growl, some sort of demonic dog-like creature, something, I don't know, that just appeared, growled in my ear, enough to make me like back off away from my bed. It freaked me out. And then, yeah, like it all kind of came down to that dream about the devil. And that was after, I think that happened probably like 3 weeks after I became saved again in September of 2009, became born again Christian. So that was kind of like the moment where it all concluded to this big giant finale, and it spooked me enough to just be like, I need to get things right. Like something's not right here,
Yeah.
But yeah, and then ever since, like I still, there's still things that I see here and there. I feel like every once in a while there's a certain presence that likes to come back around to check in, kind of. But thankfully they don't stick around like they did back then. And I praise Jesus for that, because I know it's because of him that they don't. But he put me in a situation that I've since been not only changed by, but I now try to speak upon everybody else and let them learn from my experiences, and why I believe in what I believe in, in terms of the Lord. And yeah, it was horrifying.
Wow. Maybe they show up every once in a while just to see if there's a little crack someplace and looking for
it's very
a
possible.
weakening.
I'll tell you what, there's a passage in the New Testament that says when a spirit is cast out, this could be of a person or a home, it goes around the world traveling, seeking where it can find a place to live. And when it can't find anywhere, it comes back to that house only to find it cleaned up, swept, and put in order. It then goes back in and takes with it 7 more spirits, more evil than itself. And the idea is that when you cast something out that is evil, you have to replace it with something good. And in this case, with the Bible, we're talking about the Holy Spirit. So that's just an example that when you cast something out, it does come back. It comes to look for, like you said, cracks. It comes to look to see if everything's still put in order. So if anything is ajar, anything's messed up, anything's wrong, and creep right back in. And I'll tell you what, when my anxiety takes off, when I get depressed, when I get frustrated with something, those little cracks, that's when they tend to leak in and start to push little buttons, and that's something I think everybody needs to be aware of, just on a general basis, to prevent doors from opening.
It's like when we do investigations and then we ask the client, do you want us to cleanse your house? We'll do inside and outside as well. And they'll say that sometimes it comes back. And we tell them it's kind of like when you sweep your floors, whenever you come back in, like you don't just sweep it once and that's it. You have to keep doing it because you keep bringing things with you from outside. And it's pretty much the same thing with spirits. So we always try to teach our clients how to do their own cleansing, because it will really help them in the long run too. Yeah. Justin, have you ever had anything like what Erik had?
No. The only things I've ever really had is when I'm trying to go to sleep, I'll get lights shined in my eyes, like a flashlight. And after doing research, I've heard that that's just spirit communication. Actually, just recently, I was trying to go to sleep and I was hearing my name called as if through water, like I was underwater.
That's
and somebody was yelling my name. And not too long after that, literally yesterday, Erik asked me, do you feel, or how are you feeling? And I'm like, off. And he's like, yeah, me too. So I don't know, if I'm going through spiritual growth or what, but nothing as malevolent as he's had in his sleep. I've been touched by spirits before on investigations, one of which I was coaxing into doing it and it was stupid. I shouldn't have done it. Erik remembers which one I'm talking about. And then, there was another one where we did an investigation and I'm like, okay, if you're here, touch one of us. And I got touched, got freaked out. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's here. I'm going to go outside for a little bit. I've talked about this on Paratruth. I've talked about this on multiple shows. And yeah, but nothing to the point where I felt like I was being harassed in any way by spirits.
For the viewers and listeners who don't know, Justin and Erik are not just co-hosts, but they're cousins as well. So family, they have that bond. So they pretty much pick up what another one is picking up.
Truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Anything else that you want to touch on in respect to the time slips or Mandella or anything else?
I don't think so. I mean, time slips, I feel like time slips are one of those things we're going to learn more about in the coming weeks and months and, dare I say, years. I think it's become more prevalent as time goes on, especially when we're talking about the possible introduction of alien life showing itself to humanity. That's going to be a huge time shift because we're no longer going to be in the COVID era. We'll be in the,
coexisting
era.
coexisting alien era, so time shifts are definitely going to keep happening, I think. So I don't think it's anything we should necessarily just forget about and be like, oh, it's just a bunch of people who are silly and don't know any better. But instead, I think we should consider it and be like, maybe it's something maybe something's happening. Maybe we need to be aware of it. Don't obsess over it, but be aware of it so that if something does happen and the shift happens, then we're prepared to some extent.
Well said. Well, before we sign off, is there anything would you like to tell the listeners and viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, we're on all social medias. We're on all podcatching platforms. You can visit paratruth.com, where all of the episodes are uploaded as well, our past and our rebranded versions. And most of our audio shows go out on YouTube as well. And if you're a writer, check out Right in the Pickle Barrel, which is another podcast of ours. And stay tuned because there is another podcast coming from Erik and Justin very, very soon.
And I do want to add one more on top of what he just did. For me, it's very difficult to remember certain sites and links and all that. So all you have to do is Google Paratruth and we'll pop up at the very top. So nice and simple.
Yes. Well, thank you so very much. I really appreciate you guys being here, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your episodes.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Kat.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too.
Well, thank you to my very special guest tonight and UPRN 107.7 New Orleans. Remember, if you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe. And to be a guest on the show, or if you just want to say hello, drop me an email at paranormalheart13@gmail.com. Much love to you all. Take care.